Okay, so like I said, my name is Elizabeth. This is going to be the Seabird Conservation and Hampton Roads workshop with Ruth Boettcher. Our speaker today, Ruth, has been with the Department of Wildlife Resources for the last 19 years, and she has served as their Coastal Terrestiral Biologist. She is based on the Eastern Shore of Virginia, and her area of responsibility includes the lower Delmarva Peninsula, adjacent seaward marshes, and barrier islands, as well as waters, shorelines, islands, and major tributaries of the Chesapeake Bay. Her work focuses primarily on all aspects of non-game waterbird conservation, research, monitoring, and management. Other responsibilities include providing administrative support and field assistance to Virginia's marine mammal and sea turtle stranding support. I'm sorry, sea turtle stranding networks and overseeing sea turtle nest monitoring efforts in Virginia. Prior to her arrival in Virginia, she served as the Sea Turtle Project Coordinator for the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission for 5 years. So today we are very happy to have Ruth giving this presentation on seabird conservation. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it on over to Ruth, and she's going to share her screen and present you all with this workshop.
Well, thank you very much, Elizabeth. I appreciate the introduction. And I am really happy to be able to talk to all of you about seabird conservation and management in the Hampton Roads area. And I am currently sitting on the floor of what used to be my old office upstairs in my house, which is why it looks like I'm in a closet. But anyway, there's too much sun coming in. It's just this bright glow. So anyway, so I'm going to turn off my camera and move myself over to my desk and then start the presentation. But anyway, thank you all for attending this talk, and I look forward to speaking with you after I'm finished to answer any questions. So hang tight. I'm going to turn off myself and share my screen. So yeah, I'm really happy to be able to have the opportunity to tell the tale of Virginia's largest seabird breeding colony, which just happened to be located at the locally beloved Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, or HRBT. And so I'm not actually giving a workshop per se, I'm telling a story. And the title of my story is Seabird Conservation in an Urban Setting, an Adaptive Management Challenge. So part one of my story is entitled An Overview of the History of the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, Seabird Colony, and its Inevitable Demise. And in this chapter, I will set the stage and provide a history of the colony up to the point when construction began on the expansion of the HRBT in the fall of 2019. So just to give you kind of a sense of where I am talking about, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel is part of the I-64 corridor, where it crosses the mouth of the James River between the cities of Norfolk and the city of Hampton. And you can see this upper right corner, the map there, the little yellow circle gives you sort of a 30,000 view of where I'm talking about. And then the two artificial islands, North Island and South Island, anchor the existing east and westbound tunnels and serve as tunnel entrances and exits depending on which way you're traveling. And the actual seabird colony was located on South Island, and that's how I'm going to refer to the colony from now on. And the little appendage that's attached to South Island is Fort Wool, and that will become an important site in part 3 of my story. So on the bottom right corner, I can't seem to get my pointer to oh, here we go. And this photo here is an overhead view of South Island, and you can see that it had some infrastructure on it, some, office buildings, garage bays, and what have you. And South Island is also in close proximity to the Norfolk Naval Air Station. So not only is there a high volume of cars and trucks passing through South Island 24/7, There's near constant air traffic overhead during daylight hours. So all in all, it's a really loud and busy place. So now I'm going to introduce the cast of characters, which we refer to as species of conservation, high conservation priority that comprise the South Island colony. And starting at the upper left corner is the common tern, which is a species of greatest conservation need in Virginia's Wildlife Action Plan. And next is the sandwich tern, which is not a species of greatest conservation need in Virginia, largely because Virginia is the northern extreme of the species breeding range. And so they've always naturally occurred in low numbers in the Commonwealth. And what's interesting about sandwich terns is that they almost always nest with royal terns, which is the next species I'll introduce. So it's the next photo over from sandwich terns. And both have adopted very similar breeding strategies. Both typically lay only one egg. And if you look at the photo of the royal terns, you'll see these individual eggs on the ground, and each one of those eggs constitutes one nest. And so sandwich terns are similar. And royal terns are a species of greatest conservation need in Virginia, as are the three remaining species, which includes the black skimmers shown here on the bottom left, then the gull-bill terns, which are also a state threatened species, and laughing gulls. And all of these are ground nesting seabirds that forage and spend a significant amount of time over water or in open water, and typically nest in colonies of single or mixed species. And their nest typically consists of a shallow scrape in the sand or in wrack. And you can see here, here's a nest of a black skimmer, or a photo of a black skimmer nest in sand. And then on this here by the laughing gull is a laughing gull nest in wrack. So just to give you a sense of what these nests look like. And here's a gull-bill tern nest as well. So, all right. So now I'm going to provide a brief history of the South Island colony. So 1983 marks the first arrival of the colony's two pioneering species, common terns and black skimmers. In 1985, the Virginia Department of Transportation, which manages and maintains the HRBT, agreed to implement measures for the benefit of these two breeding species. And they included vegetation control, the placement and spreading out of additional sand, primarily on the north end of the island, as well as on the west side of the island. So in these areas here. They also engaged in rat control to try to manage the invasive Norway rats, which love to eat bird eggs. And they also instituted a seasonal closure of a portion of what's called the ring road between the two brackets, yellow brackets, to vehicles and foot traffic during the breeding season to minimize human disturbance. So that all went swimmingly. And then in 1998, gull-bill terns arrived and began nesting on South Island. And then the following year, laughing gulls arrived. So from 1983 to 1998, the number of common tern breeding pairs steadily increased from several hundred to several thousand on South Island. And through the same period of time, several hundred black skimmer pairs nested on the island in relative harmony with common terns, along with 50 or fewer pairs of gull-bill terns. Then 18 pairs of laughing gulls showed up in 1999, and over the next several years, their numbers increased rapidly, and by 2006, there were over 7,000 pairs on the island. In addition to the laughers, herring gulls and great blackback gulls joined the party. And with the increases in the predatory gull populations came declines in tern and skimmer populations on South Island. So the arrival of the gulls turned South Island into this chaotic bird colony in the I-64 corridor. The green patches that are on the photo of South Island represent the protected nesting areas. And terns and skimmers that were displaced from these managed areas moved to unpaved surfaces adjacent to roads, parking lots, and interstates shown here in red. And as the laughing gull numbers increased, so did their distribution to the point where they occupied nearly every nook and cranny on the island. So the blue areas the blue shows the new areas that laughing gulls moved into, but understand that they also nested in the green and red areas. So this led to serious human safety concerns, including accidents in the tunnel. In 2004 and 5, seabird chicks entered the Interstate 64 corridor or roadway and caused about 10 accidents and 250 near accidents by drivers trying to avoid hitting the birds. The birds also became kind of a nuisance to staff that were working on the island. And we as biologists had serious concerns about increasing gull populations, reducing reproductive success of terns and skimmers through displacement, depredation, and road mortality. So these concerns led to the implementation of additional avian management measures on top of those I mentioned earlier. And so these management measures included oiling gull nests to reduce their breeding success with the hope of discouraging future nesting on South Island and minimizing gull predation on terns and skimmers. Limited removal of herring and great blackback gull adults. Installation of anti-perching coil wire along parapet railings to keep birds from perching on the rails and getting sucked into the tunnels. And installation of barriers around all bird nesting areas adjacent to roadways and parking lots in I-64 to keep flightless young contained and minimize road mortality. So amid all of this ensuing chaos came the arrival of royal terns in 2006. The first year royals showed up on South Island, there were only 6 pairs. Over the next several years, the number rose to well over 3,000 pairs, or roughly 98% of Virginia's royal tern breeding population. And the yellow patches show where the royal tern settled on South Island. So this table presents estimated annual number of breeding pairs by species between 2007 and 2017. And when you add that, when added together, they come to an average of about 7,500 breeding pairs or 15,000 adults breeding out there per year. And when you add young to the equation, we were easily well over 20,000 birds on the island during the peak of the breeding season. These numbers strongly indicate that the birds were very tied to the site, despite extreme levels of human disturbance and tremendous risks associated with avian depredation and road mortality. So then, in the fall of 2017 came the approval of the largest and the governor's most highly touted transportation initiative, the Hampton Roads Expansion Project, Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel Expansion Project, and its primary construction components included expansion of east-west approaches to the HRBT from 4 to 6 lanes, the construction of 2 new tunnels, so when completed, there will be 4 subaqueous tunnels, and the replacement of existing marine approach bridges at an estimated cost of $3.8 billion. And the bottom line objective for the birds is there a permanent removal from South Island? And the justification that was given for getting rid of the birds is that they would impede and be negatively impacted by construction activities, which are expected to go through 2025. And secondly, because of the HRBT expansion, South Island will likely have to accommodate additional infrastructure, which will leave no room for the birds in the future. And now that the construction is well underway, I believe that both predictions are true. I just drove through there yesterday and oh my gosh, South Island has turned into a huge, massive construction zone. I don't think there's a square inch that's not covered by equipment or a building or a pile of dirt or whatever. There's like 23 cranes out there and yeah, it's crazy. Anyway. So before I go into the second chapter of my story, I just want to mention much of the seabird management and monitoring work that was accomplished from between 1983 and 2015 was achieved under the guidance, leadership, and research efforts of Ruth Beck, who was a faculty member at the College of William and Mary for close to 40 years and who suddenly passed away in May of 2015. She was truly the one responsible for ensuring the protection, conservation, and management of seabirds on the island, since the very beginning, and had gained the love and respect of all the HRBT operations staff who worked really hard to fulfill her instructions, especially after she plied them with her killer homemade cakes and pastries. She was a heck of a baker. And I also want to give credit to all of Ruth's students, her many friends affiliated with Coastal Virginia Wildlife Observatory and Virginia Society of Ornithology, as well as her son, Michael, who spent endless hours counting birds, filling and stacking sandbags, and doing a bunch of other tasks under Ruth's direction. So she is sorely missed. All right, so getting into chapter 2 of my story. So in the spring of 2018, the Department of Wildlife Resources contracted with Virginia Tech Shorebird Program, who I'll refer to as the Virginia Tech team or crew, to engage in research and monitoring efforts on South Island during the 2018 and 2019 breeding season and prior to the actual start of the HRBT expansion project. And the purpose of their research was to set the stage for monitoring the future effects of HRB expansion on breeding seabirds in Virginia. So the work that the Virginia Tech team performed boiled down to 2 objectives. The first is to apply GPS transmitters on incubating common terns to gather information on within breeding season movement patterns and to be able to identify foraging locations, and to mark as many terns and skimmer adults and chicks as possible with uniquely coded field readable bands that would allow for subsequent tracking of individuals once they become permanently displaced from South Island, establish survival rates and movement patterns through active resighting efforts throughout each species range, and to quantify recruitment of marked birds to a newly constructed site or to other colonies within Virginia and beyond. So collectively, results from these analyses of the data have and will continue to help inform mitigation decisions and evaluate the success of mitigation actions. So before I describe the work completed by the Virginia Tech team, I wanted to describe the conditions that they were faced with during the 2018 and 2019 breeding season on South Island. So in the fall of 2017, VDOT paved portions of South Island that are shown in red. So that's kind of where some of the birds were displaced to after the gulls arrived, if you recall. And then in the fall of 2018, VDOT paved over more breeding habitats shown in the green sections on that photo of South Island, but still left some habitat for the birds due to project delays. So that was primarily, these areas on the north end and again on the west side. My marker is not, anyway, you guys can see where there's no colored patches. And the purpose of the paving was to reduce nesting activity with the end goal of paving the entire island by the end of 2019 when construction got underway. So the majority of the terns and skimmers nested in the remaining unpaved breeding areas, which was good. However, up to 100 pairs of common terns, black skimmers, laughing gulls, and herring gulls nested on pavement. And you can see, come on, pointer, where are you? Anyway, you can see in the bottom right photos, that cluster of 3, you can see birds that are on pavement. Those are all nesting birds. And for the first time, we saw direct evidence of high chick mortality by gulls due to overcrowding in a reduced breeding area. So literally, we had watched herring gulls snap the necks of like common tern chicks as the chicks encroached on the gulls' territories, and they just kind of left them there. So they were almost doing like canine behavior. And you can see in this photo, I mean, it's kind of next to the birds nesting on pavement, those little chick carcasses, those are all common tern chicks. So anyway, so those were the conditions on the island that Virginia Tech was presented with. But despite these challenges, they did accomplish or get a lot of work done. So as I mentioned, to gain information on local movement patterns, The team deployed GPS transmitters on a subset of incubating common terns, and each transmitter was set to collect a position every 5 minutes for the duration of tag deployment. So the tags required the recapturing the birds to retrieve the data, which is why they were put on incubating birds, which would assure that the birds would return to the nest and where they could be recaptured. So that was the whole point of applying them on incubating birds. So the team managed to deploy GPS tags on 29 common terns, retrieve tags from 26 individuals, and successfully downloaded and processed data from 24 tags. And the average period an individual carried a tag was 6 days. And these images just kind of show what we learned from this effort. So the birds spent an average of 61% of their daily cycle on South Island, and the map on the upper right corner just shows kind of their local movements. 12% of their time was spent transiting to foraging areas, 19% was spent actually foraging, and 7% was spent booking it back to the island. And, you know, I mean, we can well assume that these activity levels changed dramatically after, you know, once the chicks hatched, and a lot more, which increased the amount of travel back and forth so the adults could provision the young. So most of the foraging occurred around artificial structures such as the James River Bridge and the Monitor Merrimack, the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel bridges and trestles, the Chesapeake Bay Bridge tunnels, and there was also a fair amount of foraging going along, found along the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay. And we had one individual that foraged as far north as Clump Island near the Virginia-Maryland border, which is that northernmost dot on the eastern shore of the Chesapeake Bay there. And actually that's where where there used to be a mixed species seabird colony. It actually it had a fairly long lifespan, but unfortunately due to sea level rise and erosion, the island just kind of sort of disappeared. There's very little of it left now. All right. So in 2018, the Virginia Tech crew, with the help from my staff and other volunteers, banded a total of 2,350 adults and chicks of these 4 species shown in the table here. Most of the marked birds were royal tern chicks. And the bands applied are uniquely coated plastic field readable bands. And you can see the bands on some of these chicks here that are pretty obvious, you know, easy to spot with binoculars, and definitely the codes are easy to read with a spotting scope. In 2019, they continued banding efforts, and you'll notice that laughing gulls were added to the list of species, and a total of 2,709 birds were banded, which is 13% more than were banded in 2018, despite the fact that the Virginia Tech crew were not allowed on the island until mid-June, only worked through the end of July, and missed most of the incubation period due to restricted access. And because of the short field season, they were only able to apply GPS tags on 6 common terns, and half of the tags failed. So the information retrieved from the 3 successful tags were combined with the 2018 data and the analyses. And just real quickly, these maps show the locations of reported resites of birds banded in 2018 and 2019. The map to the left shows locations of royal terns, and the map on the right shows locations of all the other species. And what's kind of interesting, and we sort of knew a little bit about this beforehand, but royal terns tend to fly a little bit, north, I should say, after the breeding season when they disperse from their breeding sites. And we actually had individuals going as far north as Long Island, New York, before they spin around and head south to their wintering grounds that actually extend as far south as South America. In contrast, most individuals of the other species didn't do that northward monitoring as extensively as the royal terns, although a few did, and most appear to stay within the United States. But I do have to admit that these maps are a little old and need to be updated. So that might be a little bit premature to say emphatically that the other birds didn't go beyond the United States, for which I apologize. All right. I hope you guys are all doing well. I am now going into part 3 of my story, and that is the rapid creation of alternative breeding habitat for seabirds displaced from South Island. So since VDOT began paving parts of South Island in 2017 to reduce nesting activity, my agency, along with other bird conservation organizations, have been scrambling to figure out how to mitigate the loss of South Island as a seabird nesting site, which actually became a reality at the end of 2019. We knew the area around the mouth of the James River was considered high-end real estate by breeding seabirds, and that was made very evident by their extreme tolerance for human disturbance, avian predation, and vehicle-related mortality they experienced on South Island. I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with Virginia's coast, but we are fortunate to have 14 undeveloped barrier islands that are protected in perpetuity from development. So birds had a choice of nesting on very pristine habitat, yet they returned every year to South Island to nest, or at least a portion of our seabird population in Virginia did. So from this, we concluded that the best long-term or permanent solution for the birds was to build a nesting island just for the birds somewhere in the Hampton Roads area or lower Chesapeake Bay. But that takes time and a lot of money. So our suggestions to come up with temporary alternatives seem to fall on deaf ears until the public, and more specifically, the very vocal birding community, pushed the issue and demanded that something be done for the birds. So kudos to them. And I'm sure there are several folks on this talk here, and I just want to say thank you. All right. So yeah, lo and behold, on February 14th, 2020, Governor Northam delivered a directive that contained these 4 components. And today I'm only going to talk about the first one and touch a little bit on the 4th one. And the first one says that the DWR will create new temporary habitat on Rip Rap's Island, which is actually Fort Wool, and the barges in the embayment, and on barges locate them in the embayment between South Island and Fort Wool. And the 4th one states that DWR will create a new long-term habitat by working with the Army Corps of Engineers and its beneficial use of dredge material program to determine feasibility of developing a new artificial island. So we were very happy to hear the governor supports the building of a new permanent island, but we were caught a little off guard by the expectation that we would create temporary habitat in time for the 2020 nesting season, which generally starts around the 1st of April. So please understand that up to this point, we had no money and no plan in place to take any action. Suddenly we were given both and had 3 months to make it happen. So just to give you a little idea or an introduction to Fort Wool. So it's a 5 acres state and national historic landmark. And it was pretty much under construction from 1819 to 1943 because of major structural challenges. It's kind of sitting on riprap. That's its foundation. So it was constantly shifting, I guess. Anyway, the fort did see some action during the Civil War by Union soldiers who used the fort to deny Confederates access to the James River. It was also used by Presidents Andrew Jackson and John Tyler as summer retreats during their presidency. So the fort was eventually decommissioned by the military in 1953 and turned over to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And it was placed under the management of the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, who authorized the city of Hampton to develop the fort into a park and allow public access to the site. So following the February 14th directive from the governor, DWR staff obtained the necessary permits and hired contractors to transform the parade grounds into suitable seabird nesting habitat. And this entailed removal of the grass and trees that were on the parade grounds, the installation of erosion and sediment control structures and bird closure signs, which you can see in some of those photos there. The placement of sand gravel substrate on the parade grounds. So it made it look vastly different. That photo on the upper left corner shows it all. And the installation of barriers at the openings of buildings and over turret wells to keep adults and chicks from entering hazardous spaces. Basically, getting trapped in the casements and that kind of thing. We also engaged with Wildlife Services, which is part of the USDA, to remove predatory Norway rats. So all told, we successfully created 1.5 acres of nesting habitat on Fort Wool. At the same time, we leased flat top barges from a local marine construction company, and they were responsible for spudding and mooring the barges in the embayment between South Island and Fort Wool. They also put sand gravel substrate on the top sides of the barges. They installed chick barriers on the top sides of wallless barges, and you can see these are all the walls that they constructed. This is a barge that actually had 4-foot walls on it already. And then you can also see kind of the substrate that was placed on there. And then we put down these triangular shaped chick shelters to allow or to offer the chicks some cover and shade during the season. And so we successfully created an additional acre of habitat then on the barges. We also established a no boat zone with regulatory buoys around the south side of Fort Wool and the barges to keep recreational boaters, well, all boaters, a safe distance from the birds. Just so you know, Fort Wool remain closed during the breeding season. It's actually still closed, and I think will continue to remain closed. And no access was allowed by the public on the barges either. All right, so another thing that we did is to actually attract terns and skimmers to Fort Wool in the barges. DWR acquired tern and skimmer decoys and audio lures. Audio lures are recordings of vocalizations of the species that we were trying to attract that are broadcasted literally 24/7. Some of the equipment we purchased, the rest was donated by the American Bird Conservancy and National Audubon. And here are just some photos of the decoys. This is come here, Pony. This is a speaker of the broadcasting system. Also, we use solar panels to power the broadcasting system. So yeah. And once again, we did contract with the Virginia Tech crew to install and maintain this Seabird social attraction equipment and also remote monitoring cameras. They conducted weekly incubating adult and chick counts by species to obtain population estimates. And they also banded as many terns, skimmers, laughing gull adults and young as possible to calculate survival rates or estimates and assess post-breeding movement patterns. And they conducted weekly resighting surveys of banded adults and young to obtain on-site survival and breeding productivity estimates. So the numbers are still being crunched as we speak, but here are just some preliminary results. So on Fort Wool, we had between 10 and 12,000 breeding royal tern adults, nearly 6,000 nests, and approximately 5,200 chicks, of which over 2,100 were banded. We had between 200 and 275 breeding sandwich tern adults, which produced up to 140 chicks, 46 of which were banded. And there were at least 830 breeding laughing gulls and 52 gull chicks were banded. And we only had 5 pairs of common terns that nested on Fort Wool. And on the barges, we had a minimum of 329 common tern nests, which produced nearly 600 chicks, of which 555 were banded. We had at least 70 black skimmer nests, which produced a minimum of 105 chicks, of which 70 were banded. And we only had 1 pair of gull-billed terns there, which did fletch 2 chicks, and both of the chicks were banded. So these preliminary results suggest that the efforts to provide alternative nesting habitat at both locations was indeed a success. There was much greater survival of chicks to fledging than we had observed on South Island in previous years, especially in the more recent years. And we kind of attribute the success to, well, lack of human disturbance, obviously an abundant food source and, in the surrounding waters, better habitat, and a continued lack of mammalian predators. And as an added bonus, we observed a half a dozen other species nesting on Fort Wool, which included at least 36 pairs of snowy egrets, 3 pairs of oyster catchers, a handful of mallard ducks, pairs, over 50 pairs of herring gulls, and at least 1 pair of the ubiquitous killdeer, and several pairs of Canada geese. So, we kind of managed to turn Fort Wool into a bird magnet. So where do we go from here? So the plan is to continue to manage Fort Wool for breeding seabirds and to provide additional habitat on barges or an elevated platform for as long as it takes to build a permanent island for the birds somewhere within 40 kilometers of South Island. And that is going to be much easier said than done because there are a lot of use conflicts. So the military is not real excited about us intentionally constructing a bird nesting island in their restricted airspace, shown on this map by the gray circles, or a national security restricted airspace represented by the red polygons. Because there's a risk associated with striking birds, with their aircraft striking birds. The polygons with the blue and yellow diagonal hash marks are private and public oyster grounds, so those need to be avoided, as do the areas in yellow, which represent beds of subaqueous vegetation. And if that's not enough, all of those restrictions, almost all of the waters are classified as essential fish habitat. So we have selected preliminarily a few potential sites indicated by the green dots, but our work is really cut out for us to bring together all of the stakeholders, such as the Virginia Marine Resources Commission, NOAA, the military, US Coast Guard, and others, to come up with a location that everyone can live with. And with that, that's the end of my story. So if I guess I'm ready to take questions. And I will stop sharing, right, Elizabeth?
Yes, you can if you'd like to.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Thank you, guys. Okay, so I have lots of questions for you, Ruth.
Okay.
All right, so the first one, it's going to be kind of like a 2-part question. So when is the peak breeding season for terns, and how are gulls predators of terns?
Well, that's not going to work. I'm sorry. I'm going to turn off my video because the glare is, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so the peak of the tern breeding season is probably end of June, early July. So that's when, most of the birds are settled on site. It's like the chicks are starting to hatch, and that's where, they are ultimately completely tied to that site. You will have birds that fail and leave the site, and you will also have latecomers, but the latecomers tend to not do well. And I'm sorry, the second question was what again?
How are gulls predators of terns?
Okay, yeah. So so all three species, laughing gulls, great blackback, and herring gulls are predatory. They will go after eggs, other species' eggs, and also chicks, and chicks of their own species as well. So they are highly opportunistic in their food preferences, and so yeah, so they can be problematic. I hope someone asks me why are laughing gulls and species of greatest conservation need. If not, I will try to answer that at the end.
Okay. Well, I haven't seen that one come through, but
Okay.
all right. So the next couple ones are going to all be pertain to the Fort Wool. So how did they get rid of the rats, and how did the rats get there in the first place?
Mm. Yeah, so the theory is that there's a lot of movement. There was a lot of movement between South Island and Fort Wool by rats, and how they got there initially is a good question. Yeah, I never really even gave that a whole lot of consideration, because you're talking about two islands that are, surrounded by water. So I apologize about that. But what they did is they set out baits with poison, and that were only accessible by rats. And so they would, they're just like the kind of baits that you could buy in a store. It's a source of food, and in the food they put the poison. So that's how they eradicated them.
Okay. All right. And the next one is, which species did you play audio to attract?
So we did royal terns, common terns, black skimmers, and gullbill terns.
Lots of terns.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those were our primary target species. So.
Okay. All right, so this one's kind of long. So with the Fort Wool habitat conservation, did this have anything to do with the removal of the very large American flag from Fort Wool? As a sailor and other boaters, this flag tells us the direction and velocity of the wind in that area, which is very useful as an aid to navigation. What can be done to reinstall this flag?
Whew. Yes, it was removed because of the birds, and there was actually a very somber ceremony associated with that. Our law enforcement staff kind of conducted a ceremony, that taking down the flag, the actual removal of the flag. So yeah, I mean, right now, there is some question as to, the use of, or us managing Fort Wool for the birds is temporary. And the long-term plan is, once we get an island built for the birds, the site will be restored as a historic site, and the flag will be raised again. But, there, as you can well imagine, birds defecate a lot, and the potential for destroying a flag out there is huge. And that's the reason why we took the flag down, pretty much. And also, we didn't want that as an added deterrence to the birds, but, we didn't know whether the fluttering of the flag would have any effect on birds coming into the site.
Okay. All right. And the next one is, any idea why each species selected the new habitat choice that they did for Fort Wool or barge?
Yeah, great question. That's a question we asked too. So Fort Wool, we finished, creating habitat on Fort Wool before we finished the work on the barges. So the first habitat that was available was on Fort Wool, and the royal terns were kind of the first arrivals, at least, in any significant numbers. And they, as soon as the sand was placed, the equipment was removed from Fort Wool. I mean, they just plopped down and started nesting. In fact, we had a group of royal terns that nested on top of one of the casements where we had no nesting material. So anyway, and then the other species were, there was a delay in their arrival a little bit. And so by the time the barges became available, we had so many royal terns on Fort Wool, it's possible that the other species just naturally gravitated to the barges because a lot of the surface area on the parade grounds was occupied by royal terns, but we don't know that for sure. When we were kind of surprised that there were only 5 pairs of common terns that nested on Fort Wool, because there were these little areas that were still available to birds. But yeah, I mean, as soon as we finished work, getting the habitat set up on the barges, I mean, the next day we saw a common tern scrape, and then came Tropical Storm Arthur. So there was a little bit of delay, but as soon as that storm cleared out, everything got back to operating order. The birds just started, the common terns and black skimmers just started to nest on the barges. So it was pretty cool to see that. So we'll see what happens this year. We'll have our act together better. We know what we're doing now. We're ready. Work is already underway to get contractors out there to spruce up Fort Wool and stuff. So we should be in a better position to kind of monitor the arrival of the birds and kind of how they space themselves out on the 2 mitigation sites.
Okay, thank you. All right, and the next one is, at Fort Wool, will the spaces created so far at South Island be enough to sustain growing populations of gulls and terns in the future?
Probably not. So that's why we are looking to actually build an island for the birds. We're looking to build an island that's about 10 acres in size. And, it would be close to the public. It would be in the area, like I mentioned, somewhere around the mouth of the James River, lower Chesapeake Bay. And, I mean, I thought I would never in a million years during my career say that we actually need to start building islands for birds, because, we do have these 14 beautiful barrier islands. But the problem is that, they're really susceptible to sea level rise. And although, the barrier islands we're not necessarily losing landmass per se or acreage per se on the barrier islands, they are losing elevation. So a lot more area on the individual barrier islands are susceptible to storm events and more frequent tidal inundations. So, we need to start thinking out of the box, because these birds are not going to have a place to nest. And it's been proven time and time again, if you will build it, they will come. I mean, a large portion of North Carolina's breeding seabirds are on artificial islands that are created from the dredge material. They dredge from the ferry channels. And the birds have done extremely well. And it's a great way, these islands are pretty much predator free. And they can be maintained by continually adding more sand, doing some vegetation control and that sort of thing. But I mean, seriously, I never, especially in Virginia, we have such beautiful habitat, and our marshes are subsiding, marsh nesting birds are in trouble. And we need to start thinking about them as well, and perhaps doing stuff like, thin layer deposition in the marshes to increase the elevation of the marshes to accommodate birds. So anyway, yeah, we're entering a whole new chapter in water bird management.
Okay. And then just a quick follow-up to the South Island. Wasn't the South Island nesting area within the same restricted airspace?
Good question. Yeah. It was. It was, you know, how to answer this. When the directive is given by a governor, you kind of get to do, you got to do what you got to do. But yeah, you know, I mean, and actually it's funny because I actually met or spoke to a guy who's with the Naval Air Station for an entirely different reason. They were landing a helicopter on one of the barrier islands right on top of a least turn, and I totally freaked, least turn colony, and I freaked out. Anyway, managed to eventually talk to this guy who was way up there, put a stop to all of that. And we actually started to talk about the issue of, you know, island construction for birds and what have you. And he was really happy to, you know, to participate in the conversation and to be a willing stakeholder. So I think that we can come up, you know, we just need to get everyone at the table to talk about this and figure this out together as a group.
Okay, all right. And then, so I've got about, looks like about 5 more questions if you're okay with that.
Sure.
So given the overlap with so many organizations, would the spot on the Delmarva be the best? And if so, what are any issues with that?
The spot on the Delmarva. I'm assuming you, I'm not sure what the person means by that. Maybe.
Looks like they just commented for island creation.
Oh, I gotcha. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so I mean, nothing's off the table. But, you know, we really are, we just wonder why. I mean, there's still good nesting areas on the islands. I mean, all of our piping plover nesting population is on the barrier islands. You know, we have a lot of shorebirds nesting out there, and there are still seabird colonies out there as well. So there is still habitat out there. Again, the question is why are some birds choosing to go to you know, South Island and you know, the Hampton Roads area. And you know, the only thing we can figure is because there is good foraging there, you know, they have the resources they need out there. So why not, as another alternative, create an island out there where they are sort of naturally gravitating towards anyway. In the meantime, we do hope to do some research. You know, the big question on the seaside of the Delmarva is, you know, are there any limiting factors that are keeping some seabirds away? Is it, you know, is the foraging not as great? You know, we really have no sense of, you know, prey availability out there or anything like that. And certainly all of that needs to be addressed as well. But the birds have just strongly indicated that they like the Hampton Roads area. So to the best extent that we can, we would like to accommodate them in that area.
Okay. And then what about partnering with private landowners that might be willing to set aside their shoreline for nesting habitat projects?
Good suggestion. But again, shorelines, you know, especially the shorelines along the western shore are just eroding. And any shorelines in the Chesapeake Bay are just really rapidly eroding, far faster than they are, you know, on the seaside of the peninsula and the barrier islands. And that's because there's so much fetch in the Chesapeake Bay and sea level rise. And I mean, I've worked, you know, a lot of the islands, you know, Tangier and Watts Island and some of the smaller islands, you know, monitoring oyster catchers out there. And we would see within season loss of habitat. There used to be nesting least terns along the western shore of the Chesapeake Bay. And those colonies are pretty much all gone because the shoreline is gone. So while we could potentially re-nourish those beaches, we figure we might as well create an island, and you know, you're getting the habitat you need, and you're also reducing the chances of any mammalian predators going after the birds on the island. So they'll be doubly protected. We can protect them from sea level rise by adding additional sand all the time. And they also wouldn't be exposed to the level of mammalian predators they would be, tied to a mainland. That makes sense.
Yes, thank you. All right. And then why so few breeding pairs of gull-billed terns? So why
That's a
are
good question.
there?
Actually, it was really interesting, very interesting. So in 2020, gull-billed terns were the first to arrive along the barrier islands, which was kind of unusual because usually we see common terns before we see gull-billed terns out there. We have a gull-billed tern, a seabird colony on the north end of Cedar Island, and that's always supported gull-billed terns. Well, last year, we probably had over 500 breeding pairs of gull-billed terns on that north end of the island, which is the highest number we've ever seen. So first of all, they were early arrivals. They settled on Cedar Island, and then we had gull-billed terns on other sites as well, and they just settled there. And honestly, there were never really that many gull-billed terns nesting on South Island either. There was those that nested on South Island represented a very small percentage of Virginia's nesting population. So the actual draw wasn't that great either, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right, and last two. Do gulls eat the eggs and chicks of terns or just destroy them?
They destroy them and eat them, depending on what mood they're in, I guess.
Okay.
Yeah, they'll definitely eat eggs. And the thing that I mentioned about the herring gulls going after those the tern chicks, I don't know how a bird thinks per se, but I mean there was just so much crowding. They were so close to each other. They were within each other's spaces and territories, and I think perhaps the natural inclination of the herring gulls was just to go after the common tern chicks and just do away with them. And whether that much mortality and in that fashion occurs under more natural circumstances, or we don't have those crowded conditions, is probably less likely. But yeah, it was pretty concerning to see that. But again, it just speaks volumes of the attractiveness of that area to these birds. It's crazy.
Okay. All right. And then the last question was, yes, please tell us why laughing gulls are on the list.
Okay. Yay. Not that I'm queuing it up or anything. So yeah, it's interesting. So Virginia always used to be a major stronghold for breeding laughing gulls at least in the Mid-Atlantic region. I mean, we had up to, I think, 64,000 pairs in the state. And those numbers started to decline, and there was a really dramatic decline that occurred between 2008 and 2013. So we do statewide colonial waterbirds surveys every 5 years. And between those two survey periods, the numbers just crashed virtually. In fact, a large portion of our laughing gulls nested in Northampton County on the seaside of the Eastern Shore. And those colonies just started to disappear, and we lost about 80% of the breeding birds in that area alone. And they also colonies started to disappear in other in marshes on the seaside. And so in our 2015 update of our wildlife action plan, it was we need to put these on as a species of greatest conservation need, because at least in Virginia, they were not doing well. And we continued to see a decline in the population between 2013 and 2018, but thankfully not as dramatic as the one we saw previously. And I am happy to say, so for several years prior to 2020, I wasn't seeing any laughing gull chicks at all in the seaside marshes of Virginia. And that's, again, that's the area where most of our laughing gulls used to nest. I mean, literally just no chicks at all. You would see post-breeding flocks of adult laughing gulls with no chicks mixed in. And I do have to say that last year, we did see some production, and we did see the, some colonies in areas where they had disappeared, both in Northampton County as well as Accomack County. So some of the some of the bird or areas where birds were missing for a number of years, they have returned. And the deal is that laughing gulls naturally nest in low-lying marshes and Spartina marshes, and so after years and years of just getting washed out, from high tides, I mean, we would find nests floating on wrack that got washed out because of high tides, and they're still trying to incubate these eggs. And eventually they just gave up because of poor production. They weren't able to hatch chicks. So anyway, that's why they're a species of greatest conservation need. And they're native, and they're a native species. So.
Nice. All right, Ruth, so 2 additional questions did come in as
Okay.
kind of like follow-ups. Did you want to go ahead and answer them? I know we're kind of over in time, but.
Oh, I don't care. I'm good.
Okay, okay. All right, so this one is any interest in making the artificial island similar to Eastern egg where puffins are observed? A research station, in other words.
Yeah, probably. So we will be consulting with folks on, the design of the island. In fact, we're most likely going to engage with some folks from National Audubon who actually have funding to actually work on designs of islands for nesting seabirds. So, and another thing that we really want to do is not ignore the issue of potentially covering up SAV beds and oysters and what have you, and removing fish habitat, but working with folks from fisheries to actually be able to create fish habitat in addition to building this island. So can we create fish structure while building an island for the birds too? Is there any way to incorporate those two together? And I think that's going to be our key to success. And it has been done in other areas. Like I said, in North Carolina, they've got it worked out pretty well. And other folks are working on it, because in every state it's going to be different, every habitat it's going to be different. So there's a lot of factors that need to be considered, but we will look at everything, all these islands, natural and artificial, to kind of get us, to guide us in how we should construct the island.
Okay. All right, and then the last one was, when you were talking about the gulls and the terns liking the area so much, do you think that it's maybe because of the surrounding land use, like people, trash, food sources, things like that?
Oh, could be. So honestly, we have, especially the gulls would bring in food items and things that definitely came from a landfill and possibly chicken plants, because we found a lot of chicken bones. There would be half-eaten Vienna sausages. I mean, yeah, it's actually quite disgusting what they brought in. So yes, that is a good point, that those that can feed sort of opportunistically on anything definitely benefit from being near, urban areas where that kind of stuff is readily available.
Okay. All right. And that is all the questions.
All right. Good deal.
Yes. So yes, thank you everybody for coming. I hope you all learned a lot about gulls, terns, the Fort wool, all that good stuff. If you're going on any trips in the afternoon, stay warm, but have fun. And then if you're doing any other workshops, we will see you later this afternoon. So yeah, thank you guys.
Bye. Thanks, everybody. Have a good time. Bye.
Thank you.